Speaker. Freedom of speech is one of the building blocks of a democratic society. Here in the UK, we take ours for granted, and hearing a variety of opinions on every important issue helps us to form our own and helps us to choose political, societal and cultural leaders who represent our own beliefs, reflect our values and pledge to uphold them when in public office. Similarly, we learn what we find unacceptable, what to reject at the ballot box, and how to form and strengthen our own arguments against these views that we disagree with. I remember how sinister it seemed when Mrs Thatcher's government chose to ban the voices of Sinn Féin from 1988 until 1994, so that broadcasters had to use actors' voices instead. Whilst there were very strong arguments for doing this, and I certainly have no agreement or any affinity whatsoever with the actions associated with that group, who at the time affected my family directly, banning the public from hearing what they had to say seemed controlling, disturbing, patronising and heavy-handed, as it potentially prevented those of us with an interest in politics from forming our own full views on one of the key political topics of that era. Similarly, the government's recent bill which bans peaceful political protest and demonstrations, which is a vital way to make our views heard. The recent trend to no platform, those whose opinions we may not like, feels somewhat sinister too. Universities are, after all, think tanks, seats of learning. We must be able to hear from a variety of academics, writers and thinkers on both current and historic issues. Increasingly, academic freedom has sadly become a feminist issue too. It's not an earth-shattering surprise that there's a worrying trend to no platform or cancel mostly women from some universities. Recent high-profile cases include writers and broadcasters such as Germaine Greer, Julie Bundell, Jenny Murray, and academics Kathleen Stock, Alice Sullivan, Rosa Friedman, Selina Todd, Shireen Benjamin, and many others. Far from being just a handful of women accused of wrongthink and condemned as heretics, this is just the tip of the iceberg, as many students too have been asking the wrong kinds of questions. Crucially, in such cases, the women and some men themselves are then considered to be banned as people and become the subject of targeted harassment, both in their places of work and across social media. It's vital that women are allowed to speak, vital that we are allowed to question, vital that we are able to keep pushing open doors that have previously been closed to us. Of course, academic freedom and freedom of speech must also be balanced. Students and staff have to feel safe from hate and prejudice. Recently, the all-party group against anti-Semitism, of which I'm the Vice Chair, has written several letters to the Vice-Chancellor of Bristol University to condemn the views expressed by one of their staff. Holocaust denial is not a legitimate opinion or a valid point of view. Perhaps those that think so have missed the testimony of survivors or the very real evidence that still exists on the sites of those atrocious acts of evil. So too must we be allowed to dissect our past role in the repulsive histories of slavery and colonialism. Those facts must be taught in an honest and unfiltered way in order for us to view them from where we are now and in the context of our society today. So there has to be a balanced approach, and we have to be able to entrust universities and their staff and unions with this. I'm not convinced that legislation is the way to go. Universities are under increasing commercial pressure, and in a more competitive market, threatening legal action over their decisions isn't going to help when they've been under considerable financial strain. And how do we ensure that that balance between freedom of speech and hateful prejudice is maintained? Is a set of rules and the threat of financial penalties the best way to protect freedom of speech? And why are the proposals framed around freedom of speech and not academic freedom? As the academic Shireen Benjamin writes, academic freedom specifically refers to the freedom of all members of universities to pursue whatever lines of inquiry they decide in research, teaching and public engagement without fear or favour. So while I do broadly support the aims of this bill and think it raises some really important points for debate, I don't believe such legislation as it stands right now is entirely necessary, and it does seem a little bit like a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Thank you.
Video link.